Hi everybody, and welcome to the first of two videos on the Pentax LX. The Pentax LX is an interchangeable lens 35mm SLR, and what that means is it has lenses on the front, one of them. They can be taken off and a different one can be put on. It also has a reflex mirror in here, so the light from the lens goes to your eye until it goes to the film plane. It has a center-weighted meter. It has selectable shutter speeds from 4 seconds up to 1/2000th of a second. From 1/75th of a second to 1/2000th, those are mechanical shutter speeds, meaning they don't need a battery to operate. Slower than 1/75th of a second, that requires a battery to operate. So if you're out in the field and your battery dies, you're limited to everything from 1/75th of a second up to 1/2000th, which typically isn't that big of a deal. That's what most of your shutter speeds will be anyway. The automatic mode on this camera can select shutter speeds from 125 seconds up to 1/2000th of a second. The viewfinder magnification depends on the viewfinder you have. With the Sport Finder, for instance, it's significantly higher than with the standard viewfinder. The frame coverage on the viewfinders is 95% horizontal and 98% vertical. And now what that means is, let's say that you're looking at the scene as it appears on your negative. Through your viewfinder, your horizontal is going to lose about 2.5% on each side, and your vertical is going to lose about 1% on the top and bottom. So you have almost the entire frame appearing in your viewfinder when you go to take a picture, and that's pretty impressive, especially since the viewfinders are interchangeable. The prisms and focusing screens in this camera are interchangeable, and the flash sync on this camera is 1/75th of a second, which is also the slowest mechanical shutter speed. So let's talk a little bit about the camera model. This was a professional grade 35mm system SLR, and it had a lot of advanced options, a lot of advanced add-ons. A full system camera with interchangeable prisms. In fact, the prisms had different attachments that could go on them as well. Really an amazingly well thought out system. It's also weather sealed and has pretty rugged construction. Now, as I noted in my brief review, they do have some Achilles heels, but as long as you take care of them, they're pretty much ready for anything. In fact, this camera right here did a 6.5 foot face plant from a tripod onto gravel in the road. The lens that was on it at the time, which is not this one, was completely destroyed, but the camera was just fine. These were produced by Pentax in Japan from 1980 until 2001. That's 21 years. That's as long as the K1000, or almost as long. A very, very long production life. This is such a good camera that it continued to be produced after autofocus was invented, after a lot of other things, in the same general format and with the same general construction as it had all along. This was preceded by the Pentax MX, another fantastic camera, concurrent with many, many Pentax cameras, and followed by the PZ1P and MZS, sort of. Those were the subsequent professional grade cameras, but none of them really had the allure of the LX. If you have your Pentax LX, let's take a look here at the camera and see what all of the different things are. In the second video, we'll talk about what they do. So starting over here on this side, this little button here allows you to rotate the ISO setting. Without it depressed, you can't rotate it. This is the film rewind lever and film back release knob. This right here, this outer dial with the 1x to 1/4 and 4 is your exposure compensation, and this button right here right next to it is the release, and it locks in place on 1. 1x is proper exposure, 1/4x is 1/4 the light, 4x is 4 times the light. This doesn't show you in stops, this shows you an exposure value. And in the second video, I'll explain how this works and what it means for the way your images turn out and how the exposure value numbers can be read. This lever here is your prism release lever. Oops, come back here. So you can remove the prism if you would like to swap it out for a different one. This for some of the prisms, they have a hot shoe right here. This one does. Most of them don't. Most of the prism models, that is, don't have a hot shoe. This white line is your shutter speed index. It lets you know if you're in automatic, 1/2000th up to 4 seconds, or bulb. And so this is your shutter speed selection dial, and this little button next to automatic is your automatic mode lock that you have to push down to take the camera out of automatic mode. This little orange dot right here is your shutter cocked indicator. So when you take a picture, it goes black, and then when you advance the frame and rearm the shutter, it's orange again. Over here we have, as you saw, the film advance lever. This is what you advance after you take a picture. This is your shutter release button and the lock for it. So when the lock is facing this way, you can't push the shutter button. When it faces this way, you can. And then we have the frame count window with your frame count right here. And you'll notice every time you advance a frame, the frame count increases 1. So let's take a look at the front of the camera and see what everything is. These 3 pegs right here are for connecting your strap lugs. So you can either connect your strap lugs this way and hold the camera from a strap normally, or you can connect them this way and hold the camera from a strap in portrait mode. This right here is a whole bunch of things all in one. It's your depth of field preview lever if you push it inward like that. It's your self timer if you push that down and wind it. And if you push the button in and move it over, it's your mirror lockup switch. So this one dial right here does a whole lot of things. This is your lens release lever right here, and you can see there's a little pin in the lens mount, which is a silver ring that moves when you push it to unlock the lens. That orange dot is your lens mounting index, and that is how you know to line up the lens when you mount it. Here are your flash ports. The top is FP, the bottom is X, and that little 2-pin is a dedicated flash contact. I actually have never seen a flash that connects to it, so I don't really know what type of flash it's for, but other cameras like the Pentax 67-2, for instance, have that as well. On the camera's back, there's not a whole lot to see. This is the film back. This is what opens when you open the back of the camera, right there. And we'll see inside the camera in just a minute. Your viewfinder up here, and the viewfinder has some accessory grooves on it, so you can put different things on it, like right angle mounts, for instance. This is a memo holder, so when you load your 35mm film in here, you just slide the tab at the end of the box into here so you know what type of film you have. And then these little contacts are for one of the data backs that connects to the back of the camera as an interchangeable system option. The camera's bottom has a few different things here. We have this and this over here on the ends are contacts for the winder. So if you have a winder, which I don't, you would remove these, and then the winder will attach to advance and rewind the film. This is your battery port right here. This is where the batteries go. We'll see how to change batteries in the second video. This is a tripod bushing where you connect the tripod. This is your film rewind release button right here. So when you go to rewind the film, you push this down. And these 4 contacts are for the motor drive, so that it knows when the camera is taking pictures and when to advance the film. So here is the inside of the Pentax LX. Over here we have the film chamber. This is where the fresh roll of 35mm film is going to go. As the film is unrolled, it goes this way. That's a little guide pin up there and at the bottom and the top to help the film stay in proper alignment as it moves through the camera. These 2 inner silver rails are film guide rails, and what happens is the sprockets travel over those, And when the back of the camera goes and closes over it, there's a pressure plate that sandwiches the film between these pressure plates and between these guide rails and the pressure plate to keep it flat on plane. These two outer guide rails, the film edges touch the inside of them so that it can't shift up and down as it moves. This is the shutter curtain. Here is a little tab that folds in place when you're using the data back, and only when you're using the data back, because that blocks off a little part of the frame from the image so that it can record the date information unobscured in that little area. Come on, back in place. There we go. If you're not using a data back, you want to have this up in place and out of the way. This is your film take-up spool right here, and this this is your film tension sprocket right here. As the film advances, the sprocket rotates and prevents and then it has tension on so that the film can't roll backwards. When you press the film release button, however, that rolls freely to allow the film to move backwards. This is your film take-up spool, and as you see, when I advance the film, the take-up spool also advances so that the film's pulled through the camera. On the back of the camera, on the inside, we have the film pressure plate right here. This spring keeps the film cassette in place, and then this is how you remove the camera back from the camera. There's a little spring action pin in there. It just goes right back in place. Some notes on the Pentax LX and fun facts. The LX has 1,350 parts, and the assembly line required 6 people to complete each copy of the LX. They were extremely labor intensive to put together, and they're very complex on the inside. There's a whole lot of stuff jammed inside of that body. From an engineering perspective, there's some amazing work inside the LX. Also, as I noted at the very beginning, the auto exposure on this is up to 125 seconds. It's a little bit north of 2 minutes for accurate metering. That does not include reciprocity failure calculations, because that's different for every film. But a 2-minute auto exposure is pretty darn impressive, and you can use the exposure compensation dial to compensate for some reciprocity failure up to that 2-minute mark. And that the camera also uses off-the-film metering to help make sure that the exposure is incredibly accurate. Some other interesting things about this camera. They have interchangeable prisms. As you can see, there's 2 different prisms on these cameras, and focusing screens and film backs. I mean, the whole gamut of system equipment was available for these cameras. You can modify them and deck them out to fit all kinds of highly specialized needs. It really is a complete system. And one of the things I noted about this, even though it's a well-built system camera and very versatile, is that it has a weakness in how they were built over the years. So I talked to 3 camera repair techs, including Eric, all of whom specialize in or are very familiar with the Pentax LX and the way it was structured. And I pieced together some information from them to kind of understand a little bit about what's going on in here. And one of the things was that none of them had any information about how to track the history of the LX, when the different models went in and out of production, or the different variants went in and out of production. And frankly, just by looking at them from the outside, there's no way to know, because these cameras look identical. But looking at the outside of these cameras, coincidentally, both of my LXs, which I bought like a year and a half apart, the serial numbers are within 6,500 of each other, so they could easily be from the same batch or at least the same year. But you can't really tell which variant the LX is unless you're looking inside. So the Pentax, over the course of 21 years, changed out the circuit board in these twice. There are 3 different circuit boards that the LXs came with. They also changed out the shutter winding system and curtains twice. So there's 3 possible winding systems and 3 possible curtain systems in the LXs. They changed out the top cover once. As far as I know, it looked exactly the same from the outside, but the change was an internal change. And so even when these were brand new, repairs were difficult. Now what that means is that with 3 winders, 3 shutters, 3 circuit boards, and a different top cover, they weren't all introduced at the same time. There aren't 3 variants. The circuit boards, the winders, and the shutter curtains were introduced at different times. There are at least 9 different internal variations on the LX over its production run of 21 years. And the parts are not interchangeable from one variant to the other. So one with a newer shutter system can't have the newer shutter system inserted into a camera with an older shutter system as an upgrade or as a replacement. So if you have one of these and you've thought about getting it fixed, get it fixed soon while parts are still available, because at some point it's going to be extremely difficult to get parts for these LX bodies. So a couple of things not to do with your camera. Don't touch the shutter that we saw when we had the back of it off. That's a good way to brick your camera and ruin an otherwise perfectly fine and very expensive camera. Don't touch the mirror that's inside of the shutter box, because that's a surface-coated silver mirror inside there, and finger oils will tarnish the mirror and cause you to have problems, if not an impossibility, focusing the images. Don't leave your camera or lenses in your car. The heat damage can cause the oils to get really thin and get to places that they're not supposed to be, like on the aperture blades especially, and then thicken again, and then things don't work properly because lubricating oils are in places they aren't supposed to be and not in places where they are. Also, if you leave it out in the cold, the lubricating oils can break down and become thick and gummy and cause things not to work properly. And also, having a camera like this inside your car is a good way to get your car broken into. It's another good reason not to leave it in your car. Don't keep your camera in a plastic bag or box unless you have a very good and rechargeable desiccant pack in there, because once moisture gets into it, and it will, that will spur fungus growth on your lenses and inside your equipment, cause it to get a mildewy smell, and otherwise ruin perfectly good equipment. If you do keep it in something like a Pelican case like I do, make sure you have a rechargeable desiccant pack in there as well. And the last thing, even though your camera is weather sealed, don't let it get wet. Don't take it scuba diving, for instance, but also your camera's weather sealed, but unless you're using a weather sealed lens, the lenses are not weather sealed, and so there's an entryway for moisture around your lens. So the camera can take a lot of abuse out in the field because of the weather sealing, but if you're even in some settings, it's really good for moisture, drizzle, dust, things like that. But if you're in a hurricane, you're likely to experience some problems. If you're in a hurricane, you might have other problems to worry about at the immediate moment, but you get my drift. And just remember, your camera is a precision tool and it should be handled with care and respect. As long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. So that's it for the first video where we looked at what everything is. In the second video, we're going to talk about how to use all of these different things. If this video was helpful, please give me a thumbs up. That lets me know I'm on the right track and that I'm producing content which is useful and helpful. If you have questions or comments, please leave those below, and I try to respond to those fairly quickly. If you have suggestions for future videos, please let me know. A lot of the way that these videos look now comes from your suggestions. And one last thing, thank you guys for watching. But this one's serial number is 5260785, and this one's serial number is 52672. They're like the same age. Well, that doesn't do any good. Really? They're like within, that's crazy. They're within 6,500 of each other. They're probably from the same batch. At any rate,